Beth's love for her husband was profound, a bond that once defined her life. Since his passing, she's relied heavily on her son, finding solace and stability in his presence. Her dependency has grown into possessiveness that strains their relationship, as she clings to him with a mixture of neediness and fear. Her grief has morphed into consuming reliance, and her son's every move becomes a lifeline she struggles to let go of, even as it pushes him further away. Beth recalled the day her husband had died. It had been a hot day, and he had decided to mow the back lawn. She had tried to explain it was too hot, but he wouldn't listen. He said that he needed to mow the lawn. It was the one thing he enjoyed, as he loved his garden, and then Beth became concerned when she heard the mower stationary. After rushing out the back, she discovered Stuart unconscious on the recently cut grass. Beth ran over to him, felt for a pulse, and started CPR. She had her phone on her, so she stopped and dialed for an ambulance quickly, but it was to no avail. By the time they had arrived, there was nothing they could do, and they tried to comfort her, telling her she had done all that she could but that he was dead. He had a massive heart attack, and since that day she has always relied on her son Brett. Brett had been her only child, and they had done everything together. He was only 10 when his father passed away. And since that day Brett and Beth had been inseparable. She hadn't meant to, but it was as if Brett had replaced her husband. But now Brett had met Linda. Beth had tried to be friendly to the girl, but she just felt Linda wasn't right for her son. No one would be right for her son. What would Beth do if Brett wasn't there? She was frightened of being alone, and Linda was wanting Brett and her to get their own place. They had met at a line dancing club, and they had a connection from the moment they met. They were deeply in love. Brett loved his mother, but Linda kept explaining to him that he needed a life of his own and that he shouldn't be the one to look after Beth for the rest of his life. Beth could live for years. After getting to know Linda and concluding that she wasn't good for him, Beth tried to talk to her son. What life do you think you will have with her? She can't cook. She doesn't make your bed when she stays here. She doesn't even iron your clothes. How are you going to survive? She doesn't even have a stable job. She just keeps getting cafe jobs waitressing, and then she loses that one, and then she starts another one. You're never going to be secure with her. She's never going to make you happy. You don't have anything in common except your bloody line dancing. You don't even like the same movies. Mom, there is more to life than movies, and we love each other. It's not that I don't love you, Mom. I will always love you. I will always visit, and I will always be there for you. But I must have a life of my own. Surely you understand that. Beth tried to understand, and every time Linda did something wrong, she would try to get under Brett's skin, but he wouldn't listen. Linda tried to get closer to Beth. She did try to make an effort. One day she invited Beth to go to a fair with her. Beth was hesitating. She didn't want to get to know Linda better. But Linda persisted, and Beth eventually caved and went to the fair with Linda. There were lots of stalls, and Linda had been looking at jewelry and clothes. Of course, she thought Brett would be able to afford to buy her everything. Stupid girl. Then they saw a tarot reader sign. Beth had never had her cards read before, but it was something she had always been curious about. So they approached Elise. Elise explained that there would be a half-hour wait. Beth said that was okay, Linda, and she would get something to eat. Linda kept going on and on about apartments that she and Brett had been looking at and how perfect life would be. She kept talking about their life together and that they would have a family of their own. All the while Beth sat there feeling devastated, realizing what an impact that would have on her life. Her life would never be the same. What would she do without Brett there? They ate tea together, watched TV together, and said good night and I love you to each other every night. What would she do on her own? They returned to the tarot booth. Beth had her reading. Elise had read the past, the present, and the future, which hadn't really meant a lot to Beth at that stage, but some things did ring true. Then Elise took out the tin box and asked Beth to shuffle for a final card for her reading. Elise explained that these were her special antique cards and that they were always reserved for final enlightenment on the reading. So Beth took the cards, shuffled them, and the Empress card was revealed. Elise explained that this was a very good card, indicating that to benefit from this time, Beth will need to completely channel her loving and creative energies, to make use of her talents, to embrace her feminine side, and motherly instincts. Elise told Beth she could take a photo of the card on her phone if she wanted to keep the card for further reference, which she did. Brett and Linda had found the perfect home. It was within their budget, and Brett was now ready to make the move to his new life with Linda. He knew Beth wasn't going to take the news very well. He cooked her tea and sat down to relax. Once he felt that Beth was relaxed enough, he broke the news that within 2 weeks he would be moving out with Linda. Beth felt sick, so she begged Brett not to move. She explained to him that the house was big enough for them to all live with her, that he didn't need to move out, and that they could live there too, but Brett explained that they wanted a place of their own. It had nothing to do with Beth. They just needed a place of their own. Beth couldn't understand. She couldn't stand to lose Brett. Beth invited Linda over, hoping that maybe she could talk sense into her. Linda arrived, and everything started quite nicely, really. They shared a cup of tea, and Beth explained to Linda the advantages of them all living together. They would be more financially secure. They wouldn't need to pay a bond. They didn't even need to pay rent. She could be like a daughter to Beth. Beth would teach her everything. Then she wouldn't have to lose her son. She told Linda that Brett had been her rock since her husband had died. They had always been together, and she didn't know what she would do without him. But Linda was insistent that they needed their own life together. Beth just sat there, tears rolling down her face, but it didn't seem to mean a thing to Linda. Beth could feel a well of rage. Her stomach was churning. She didn't know what to do. Her mind was in turmoil. She wanted to think straight. All she could think about was that she was going to lose Brett. Beth had to do something about Linda. She had to do something about Linda now. She tried to go about her business. She was chopping up some meat for the night's casserole, thinking that she wouldn't be cooking any more casseroles for Brett and that this trollop was taking him away from her. And as she chopped the meat, she felt a sudden urge to get rid of Linda. Her hands were trembling as she picked up the knife and walked over to Linda, who kept talking and talking about her new life together with Brett. Beth couldn't handle it anymore. She walked behind the chair where Linda was seated and tried to stab her in the back. But to Beth's surprise, Linda was very agile, and she shot up out of the chair. Beth had been so distraught and shaking that she had hesitated and had hardly marked Linda with the knife. The knife had fallen to the floor, and Linda picked it up. Beth tried to regain the knife, and they struggled, but to no avail. Linda, in defense, had stabbed Beth in the neck, her blood spewing everywhere. Linda was in a panic. She didn't know what to do. She didn't understand why Beth had even tried to do this to her. She hadn't meant to hurt Beth, but she had. She quickly called for an ambulance, but it was useless. How could she tell Brett what had happened? So she ran out of the house, got into her car, and drove. She drove for what felt like an eternity, stumbling through her mind, trying to come up with some alternate scenario the police might believe, but there was none. She eventually went home, waiting for the devastating knock on the door. Brett received a phone call while he was at work. The police had asked if he could go to the station, which he did, and there they explained what had happened to Beth, that she had been stabbed and had died. Brett asked them how this could have happened, and they explained that there was no sign of an intruder, that a neighbor had seen Linda enter the house, and that they saw her exit the house a few hours later and run to her car. Brett's mind was racing. He couldn't believe how such a thing could have happened. Linda would never do that. He explained to the police that Linda and Beth had a good relationship and they were going to move out soon, but the police were insistent that they would be picking up Linda to find her account of what happened. They arrived at her door as she had expected. Linda explained that Beth had stabbed her and that she had stabbed Beth in self-defense. The problem was there wasn't a mark on her because she was wearing a leather jacket and the knife had barely pierced that, let alone her. So, she was taken to the police station and charged. At sentencing, Linda was charged with manslaughter after a long deliberation by the jury, and she was sent to jail. Now Brett sat alone in his mother's house with nothing. He had lost all the people he loved. Eddie was a detective. Eddie wasn't his original name. His parents had named him Edward, but it had never sat well with him. During his years of school, he used to get teased. The kids would bow and call him King. He was angry with his parents. He didn't understand how in this day and age someone would call their child Edward. So when he was old enough, Edward decided to change his name to Eddie. He felt it suited him better. Even though he had changed his name, a little bit of the King's name had stayed with him, and he wanted to be king of the detectives, as strange as that may sound. His primary motivation was to ascend to the position of chief of police, a role he believed would allow him to enact significant changes within the department. He grew up in a tough neighborhood and witnessed the impact of crime on families and communities. His father had been a police officer and was killed in the line of duty. After joining the police force, Eddie quickly made a name for himself as a talented detective. Eddie's superstitions stemmed from his father's belief in signs and omens, which he adopted as a way to cope with the pressures of his job. Eddie stood 6 feet tall with a muscular build, a testament to his dedication to fitness. He had short, dark brown hair that was often slightly tousled, giving him a rugged appearance. He carried a leather shoulder holster where he kept his service weapon, alongside a weathered notebook filled with notes from case investigations. Presently, he was putting the final evidence away for Beth's case. He had seen Beth's mobile phone and noticed the picture of the tarot card. A strange realization came over him as he recognized the style of the card. He had recognized it from the report of the accidental death of a young man that had been juggling with fire and had burnt to his death. It was a bit odd that they would both have the same type of card even though the deaths were not connected. He just found it intriguing. It wasn't suspicious as the other death had been an accident, but it was odd. He filed the evidence. Remember to like, subscribe, and share to others, so you don't miss an episode.